Hi everyone, Spectrum Pulse here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Chelsea Wolfe album, Hiss Spun. This is the latest album from the siren of tortured gothic song, Miss Chelsea Wolfe, whose artistic progression really started turning heads back in 2010. I really enjoyed the noisy, ethereal, dark, art rock direction, but also like a little folkiness here and there on her Apocalypsis album in 2011. She went slightly more synthetic, like embracing like a very kind of dark wave sound on her next record, Pain is Beauty. Explored some acoustic cuts on Unknown Rooms, and then plunged listeners into a deep, despondent, like impossibly dark sonic abyss on her last full-length record, Abyss, her heaviest and most enveloping album thus far. With each record, it's almost like Chelsea takes on a slightly different aesthetic or pulls from a different set of influences, which is one of my favorite things about her. And this time around, on Hiss Spun, I'm catching a lot of notes of doom metal and atmospheric sludge metal, and the riffs and the drum beats and the slow monolithic pace of a lot of these songs, the blaring guitars, the down-tuned, distorted, ribcage rattling bass. It's a style that generally I like a lot, but I can be kind of picky with my doom metal. Obviously, heaviness and pace are a factor and kind of what makes the music what it is, but it's not enough to simply be loud. Like, the best doom metal artists, in my opinion, are ones that successfully perform this balancing act between playing this really slow, glacial, cerebral style of metal music, but also keep things engaging and kind of visceral. And there are countless bands that play it so slow and so bland and so predictable that their music becomes tedious just 1 minute into a 7-minute song. Now, unfortunately, there are at least a few tracks on this new album over here that fall into that category. I was kind of shocked at how subpar the opener is. The riffs on this thing are kind of generic, like very run-of-the-mill when it comes to this genre, but potentially the worst thing about this track is the aimless and endless and painfully awkward guitar soloing all over the song. It's trying way too hard to be sinister and really feels like it's trapped in this really basic minor scale progression. I'm not even sure if I really care for the way Chelsea's cavernous vocals are playing against these riffs, which in comparison with a lot of the guitars on her previous work are very raw, very dry, very heavy, very upfront. Meanwhile, Chelsea's voice, disembodied, ghostly voice, feels kind of disconnected from it all. Thankfully, the album picks up pretty quickly after this with some lead singles like 16 Psyche, which upon more listens reads to me as like this monolithic take on 90s alternative metal and rock, especially with the despondent verses and the driving quarter note riffs on the hook. This era of rock has long been an influence on Chelsea's music. It's cool to hear that it's still an influence on Chelsea's music and that she was able to twist it into this heavier, darker, more devilish style on this new album. The loud, soft dynamic on this track does wear on me after a little while though. It seems kind of obvious, and it is done better later on the album with the song Twin Fawn. I'm not really wowed by the tune of this track either, outside of Chelsea's haunting vocals soaring over the thunderous guitars on the hook. The song Vex features this really hypnotic drum beat that's like 4 eighth notes, it sounds like, on the bass drum, and then 4 more on the snare. Bum, 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 dun, 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 It's got a great, like, lurking, slithering groove to it that reminds me of like some early Marilyn Manson. And Chelsea singing on this track is the first time on this record where she hits me with this vocal performance that really sends chills up my spine. And there's also like some growling male death metal style vocals that pop up later in the track and add so much personality, so much texture, so much gruffness. The instrumentation behind all of it like swells in this hellish fashion. My only major disappointment with the cut is just its sudden finish. Given the intensity, given the heaviness, given just how well the song had been going up until that point, I feel like there just could have been more to it, especially given that there are longer tracks on this thing that don't exactly justify their length, like the song Particle Flux, whose driving bass line and repetitive lead vocals kind of lose their luster before the song's big explosive finish at the very end. The song Strain is a pretty decent interlude, adds some nice, somewhat electronic textures into the mix. It's a point on the album where Chelsea subtly brings in these more industrial influences, which I wish showed up in a bigger way on the rest of the album, rather than just kind of being a side dish on these shorter songs. I mean, for this influence to show itself more proudly on the rest of the record, I think would have made the album generally more sonically interesting, and it would have been a pretty easy incorporation given just just how close industrial metal is to the goth world that Chelsea holds sympathies for. Well, more than sympathies, she's like the princess of the gothic realm. For me, tracks like Welt and Offering, while I did enjoy the sound of these shorter tracks, they just kind of felt like they were placeholders thrown into the track listing to kind of break up the doomier, heavier spots on the record. The song Culling was another highlight for me. I love the song's very subtle and very nuanced and tension-building, quiet introduction. It eventually hits listeners with this rumbling bass and some primal drums at the halfway point. Then there's a powerfully heavy second half, one of the more refreshing structures in the track listing here, and I loved the chillier and more acoustic take on the song Two-Spirit. The guitars drone very loudly when the song hits its emotional intensity point. The vocal melodies are one of the few points in Chelsea Wolfe's entire discography where I would call them sultry. They were pretty sultry. And the song Scrape, while I do wish it finished the record off in a bigger fashion, it is a highlight for me on this record for a few reasons. I mean, for one, Chelsea's vocals on this track seem so much more upfront, close, and tangible on this track, more than they do on any other song. And honestly, it's a great change of pace. Like, to have that close, aggressive vocal intimacy with her on such a loud, blaring, crushing track was actually exhilarating. While I do enjoy her very reverby and cavernous aesthetic, there is an element of obscurity that comes with that. And in my opinion, Chelsea, when it comes to her vocals, really has nothing to hide, and that is proven on this track. Again, very powerful, crushing finish, mostly an exciting end to the album. Overall, I thought this record was decent. It's not one of my favorites that Chelsea has put out this decade, but it's certainly an admirable release with more hits than misses. But in my opinion, the songwriting was just a tad inconsistent. Chelsea's foray into this heavier, slower style does come with its growing pains, its awkward moments, its missteps. However, no reason not to look forward to what she's doing in the future, because most likely that's going to be something different as well. A lot of quality tracks on this thing, and diehards for super heavy metal music are likely to enjoy this thing even more than I do. I'm feeling a strong 6 to a light 7 on this thing. Transition. Have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe, and please don't die. Just stay hydrated and eat your fruits and veggies, okay? Over here next to my head is another Chelsea Wolfe review. Please check that out, or click on the link to subscribe to the
to subscribe to the channel.
And I'll catch you guys in the next one, okay? Chelsea Wolfe, Hiss Spun Forever.